Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, March 26th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about a 2024 presidential election rematch between President Joe Biden, the incumbent president of the United States, and former President Donald Trump, who has been making a lot of campaign related announcements, campaign related stops all across the United States ahead of the 2024 election. Donald Trump being one of the main Republican contenders for the Republican nomination in the upcoming presidential election cycle. Joe Biden, on the other hand, has yet to announce his highly expected re-election bid. Joe Biden at this point has not officially declared that he is running for president, though the speculation is that he intends to do so, considering no other major Democrats besides Marianne Williamson have announced their intention or declaration in the 2024 race. So this rematch is looking increasingly more likely as the days progress. Looking at our Republican nomination trend line, Donald Trump is on the rise and his numbers are only getting better. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that he is getting better on the general election front. What you see here is that Joe Biden, though back and forth with Trump, there were larger leads for Donald Trump in last year's poll, and leading over the past couple of months. We've seen a variety of new numbers released across the United States, but more recently ones that seem to indicate a more competitive race than the last election cycle. Now, I will say this in my honest truth, I don't know how very competitive this race is going to be. I think there is a clear, at least expected winner at this point, and I think a lot of it comes down to where the race is and where these candidates are in terms of national recognition, in terms of recent standpoints on different issues, elections, etc. I think right now what we see is that President Donald Trump and President Joe Biden have maneuvered themselves in such a way that they are very much expected to be facing off against each other over the next couple of years. I think it's entirely expected based off of where we are, based off where Donald Trump is, based off where the Republican Party is, and I cannot say I expect much else as of today. Now, we don't know who else is running for president. We don't know if Ron DeSantis will be entering into the race. But with all of that taken into account, knowing the current state of the race, we can expect Donald Trump to be the nominee, Joe Biden to be the nominee, and this rematch to occur. So now that we have all the background information, now that we have a lot of the background knowledge necessary to make an accurate prediction, hopefully an accurate prediction, we'll find out in 2 years' time, we are looking at very, very similar results on many fronts for this election cycle. Not Missouri, let's not go that far, but for a lot of the safe states, we aren't seeing any shockers. This is not some type of dramatically different election than the last, and unfortunately, we aren't going to see much else interesting outside of the traditional swing states. For example, we're not going to be talking about the new competitive nature of states such as Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, or in those blue states of New York or Maryland or Illinois. Even if some of them may have been more competitive this time around, I don't necessarily think that means they will be more competitive in 2024. And when I say this time around, I mean 2022. Because what we also know is that we cannot take midterm election results and directly apply them and expect them to be our presidential results. Look at 2010, right? Look at the way that was an electoral blowout for the GOP. What happened in the general election in 2012 was a Democratic blowout, right? You look back at other elections, sure, sometimes it's an indicator, but not always. And I think that midterm elections in 2022 were very balanced in the sense that neither party was necessarily on top. Republicans did win control of the House, Democrats expanded in the Senate, but it wasn't like 2018. Republicans didn't have a 40-seat pickup. They had a few minimal pickups, and it was nothing super impressive, at least from what our expectations were. The Senate, on the other hand, was very good for the Democratic Party, but it doesn't mean they're solidified or solid in for 2024. But again, the state of the race, I think, is clear as of right now. I can't tell you definitively that this is going to be the actual result, but I can tell you this is generally what we're thinking. So we're at 122 for Donald Trump. Should be a little bit more. Alaska we can throw in there, but I don't know if Alaska is going to necessarily be a safe state in 2024. I think likely actually might be a better characterization, so we're actually going to pull back on that one. But for the rest of these states, I think we're at a pretty good point of understanding what this race is currently at. 122 for Donald Trump, 181 for Joe Biden, and the remaining states are ones that we can expect to be at least somewhat competitive. So knowing that this is a rematch, it's also very important as well because other Republicans would do, I think, tremendously better than Donald Trump in some of these battleground states, for instance, Virginia, Colorado. I think these are states that would completely reject Donald Trump's reelection bid, but maybe more inviting or open to potentially a Glenn Youngkin or a Ron DeSantis or even a Nikki Haley. I think for the sake of Virginia and Colorado in this video, we're going to consider them to be likely states. I could imagine a reality that they are more Democratic because of where the 2020 election results were. I don't think Joe Biden is necessarily in the same position that he was in back in 2020 in terms of favorability, but I also don't know if it really is super important. You see, Donald Trump was disapproved of his entire election cycle and still almost won in 2020. The understanding is that an unpopular president can't win re-election, but Barack Obama was unpopular when he won in 2012. He was down about 5 points nationally, and based on that alone, he should have been completely demolished in the general election. But he wasn't. In fact, he won, and Democrats won in the Senate and came closer in the House. So it really is a tricky indicator, but I don't necessarily think approval rating will also matter as much for President Biden if he's faced off against Trump. When put up against someone like Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis, at that point, it becomes difficult. Because Joe Biden is unpopular, but Americans don't know these other Republicans well enough to form negative opinions. Donald Trump has put himself in the spotlight, and all press, including negative press, is the reason why he has been so successful in 2016, but hasn't really been so much since then. But faced up against an even more unpopular candidate, I don't necessarily think approval rating is going to make all the difference, which might be an indicator as to why I still think Virginia and Colorado are going to be likely blue states. I'm also of the opinion that New Mexico will be a likely blue state, but I think states such as Alaska will also be in that characterization. I don't see shifts in Iowa or Ohio to the extent that I think need to be there for Joe Biden to come closer than he did in 2020, or if he comes closer, it will be negligibly. I think that these are states that have seen Donald Trump through and through, and including his candidates, including his nominees, and every single time have handed him a reliable, solid victory, all within the likely characterization. So Iowa, Ohio, two states I think the Democrats really want to be able to capture back. Number one, I don't necessarily think that Donald Trump has lost much support there. But number two, we have to recognize that what we have seen is a very dramatic shift, and we have seen no signs of a reverse in these states. Even in 2018, Sherrod Brown's victory here was minimal in Ohio. In 2018, Democrats lost in the Iowa governorship. They lost statewide despite winning those House races. But 2 years later, they lost every single seat except for one in the Iowa delegation in Congress. So Iowa, Ohio, likely red states on this map. I would also say, Democrats have a likely characterization in Maine. I think they would also save it in Minnesota and New Hampshire. I don't really see these states budging too further towards Donald Trump. I think before, in my older predictions, I made characterizations where I expected Donald Trump to do better. I thought it made sense, and for a while it did. But since the 2022 midterms, since a lot of the recent events and comments and discussions being had and being made, and the actions taken by both President Biden and President Trump, I honestly think President Biden is in a much better position than he was a year ago. And then honestly, even a year and a half ago after the November election in the state of Virginia back in 2021. So Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, Minnesota, and New Hampshire all joined the bunch as likely blue states. And I think that's fair for where we are today. Now, looking at our remaining 165 toss-up electoral votes, I am also still of the opinion that many of these states are going to be reduced to being no longer likely states. I think Nevada, Arizona, Texas even, and this one I'm a bit iffy on, and we'll talk about that when we get to the state, Georgia, North Carolina, even Florida too, which I also am iffy on, but I don't think Donald Trump is necessarily the one that's going to drive it into the likely characterization. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. I could see Florida being likely, and I think that also needs to be talked about more. Nebraska, Maine, 2nd District. I don't know necessarily if that one's going to be likely red. But generally speaking, this is where we are. And I will say, I think in some regions of the country, Donald Trump is a weaker candidate. I think in the Rust Belt, he hasn't exactly proven himself to be this super strong candidate again for 2024. I think we're starting to see some pushback even from his own home state of Florida amongst Republican voters there. Not necessarily anywhere else, but more so in Florida, a little bit in North Carolina. For some reason, some of the more southern states seem to be pushing back against Donald Trump. Maybe it's because they're closer to Governor Ron DeSantis. Maybe because they've seen more praise from their own state's delegation for Ron DeSantis. A lot of combining factors could be the reason as to why Donald Trump isn't seeing sometimes the level of support in states such as North Carolina or Florida or Georgia that he otherwise might be seeing on the national level. But generally speaking, Donald Trump has been pretty solidified. I think he's worser in some areas, or not worser, but just worse in some areas, compared to before. But he also provides a benefit. I think Donald Trump could do a little bit better than he did in 2020 in Florida in 2024, which also is why I'm a bit iffy about not having it as a likely red state. I think, honestly, likely red may be my safest bet, but I don't know if that's exactly what I envision an election being held today resulting in. I think Joe Biden is in a very good position when it comes down to winning in some of these states. I think that he has a very good shot at winning a lot of the states that he did in 2020. And I think what we have seen over the past 2.5 years, or I guess 2 years, not going on 2.5, 2 years, because we just finished January 2023, is that he has had honestly quite some successes. And for some reason, Democrats have been able to up their campaign game on a lot of the swing races, a lot of the competitive races, and Joe Biden's, de facto campaign, more so the White House accounts and the way that they've been approaching heading into a re-election bid, seem to be a lot more, including President Biden himself, seem to be a lot more critical and on the offense towards Republicans. It's not as if they're just playing defense and they're trying to defend the president. No, Joe Biden is going out there and going after many of these Republicans, and I think is doing him some benefits when it comes down to future elections, and specifically the 2024 one. Right now, I would say that I think Donald Trump wins Texas. I think this is a lean red state, and I think it's only going to get closer from here. Do I think it flips? No. Against any candidate? No. I don't think that Texas is going to flip in 2024. It's going to be close. I think it's going to be closer than it was in 2020. It was 6.5 points in 2020. I don't think it's going to be larger than that, but I don't think it's going to be all of a sudden the first Democratic victory in Texas since Jimmy Carter. I don't think that's going to happen. Maybe in 2028, probably more so in the 2030s, but I think we overestimated Democratic support in 2020, and I really want to shy away from doing that this time around. Not to say that I think I'm overcompensating for Republicans, because I don't think I am, but generally speaking, there was a lot more conversation. Okay, Beto O'Rourke got 2 points close. Does that mean it's going to be even closer in 2020? No, because it was a presidential election year. The trend line is there. Democrats just need to maintain it, and I have no doubt that they will. In Nebraska's 2nd district, I think this one's going to be a lean blue district. It was slightly gerrymandered, more so in favor of the GOP. It's really difficult to sort of crack this district entirely. Nebraska Democrats seem to be lucky enough on that front, but Nebraska's 2nd district, I still think, is going to be trending towards the left more and more and more with this suburban sprawl, with the urban area of Omaha. We are going to see Democrats do better in Nebraska's 2nd district. I think even the House race could be more competitive. And right now, I would say this district itself is going to go to Joe Biden. I think Donald Trump wins in Maine's 2nd congressional district, as he did in 2020, but I don't think the advantage is as strong. I'm going to come out and say that I think that Joe Biden is going to win Georgia by a larger margin than he did in 2020. I think he also wins Arizona by a larger margin. I think Donald Trump is widely expected to do better in the state of Nevada, but I really don't see it happening. I think Nevada is going to stick around the same, about a 2-point victory for the Democratic Party. It's not all too impressive, but it's certainly a victory, and it's one that Democrats historically and currently have been able to rely on in that battleground state. I think Florida is going to be, honestly, let's give it a likely red characterization. That is my safest bet. I think there is a very good chance it narrows down to lean. You're talking maybe a 4 to 5 point victory, but at that point, really, it's still going to Donald Trump, and the characterization is really negligible on that front. But I think to be the most accurate as to what is probably going to happen, Florida deserves a likely red characterization, but I could very well imagine if Donald Trump continues down this pathway, especially with a fractured party. Not to say it wasn't in 2016, but they had a very, very unpopular enemy, Hillary Clinton at the time, someone that Republicans were so terrified of because they thought she was such a bad person that they could not fathom the idea of her becoming president of the United States. I don't think that's the same thing for Joe Biden. Although he is very much unpopular amongst Republicans, he's not as unpopular amongst the American public. Hillary Clinton had -20, -30. Joe Biden does not. At worst, -10. And I think it's come to a point where we recognize there is a fundamental difference when you're facing off two unpopular candidates versus one that is slightly unpopular, I guess you could say. Definitely in terms of approval rating, but as a person, his favorability ratings do a lot better. Versus 2016, where it was -30, -30. It wasn't really that much of a difference, and it was choosing a lesser of two evils. That wasn't the same rhetoric that was used in 2020, and I don't think it will be in 2024 because we've moved past that point. You're talking incumbent versus former incumbent. So we are at 219 for Donald Trump, 259 for Joe Biden. I'm going to also say, I think Joe Biden wins in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I think these are states that are going to be anywhere from 2 to 4 points for Joe Biden, but I think he wins re-election. I didn't before. You can go back to my old Donald Trump versus Joe Biden rematch videos and see that I did not think Joe Biden was going to win re-election. I do think so today. I think Donald Trump has positioned himself uniquely in an unelectable position following the 2022 midterm elections. In fact, I think Donald Trump is one of the very few Republicans that would lose to President Biden. Now, don't get me wrong. I think President Biden is the most electable choice for Democrats in 2024 of the potential contenders as of right now. And I say that because I don't think many other people have considered number one running, but number two, if not him, it'll probably be Vice President Harris. You have two options here, and I think based off of current approval rating, just based off a statistical standpoint, Joe Biden's favorability rating is higher than Vice President Harris's, and that is a very big thing to consider. I also think that as an incumbent, incumbents rarely lose. That's why it was such a big deal that Donald Trump lost the race. He came in with a trifecta and lost, with Democrats winning a trifecta against his own party. I think this time around, though Donald Trump was maybe more electable back when Joe Biden was viewed as so unpopular, what the midterms proved was that the American public was not willing to accept Trumpism, even to push back against an administration that they do not approve of themselves. What we have seen here is that the American public is not willing to elect Donald Trump surrogates into governor positions, House positions, Senate positions, simply to push back against President Biden. That is the difficult position that Donald Trump is in, even though he is very, very popular amongst Republicans at this point as a potential contender for the 2024 election cycle. And the final state is the state of North Carolina. This is a state where I think would narrowly go to Joe Biden, and I know this is probably controversial, but I think as of right now, and also looking at the reduction in support from 2016 to 2020, and then seeing how Democrats, at least somewhat, know how to organize, know how to campaign in this state, I think while Ted Budd was able to win here, Ted Budd was not Donald Trump. Ted Budd was far removed from Donald Trump. He was Donald Trump's endorsee. He was the one that received the endorsement, but he did not campaign like Donald Trump. He did not run on the same platform or was not nearly as controversial. Ted Budd was a little-known congressman who was able to avoid controversy, avoid the fray, and really was able to win. Even against a strong Democrat, Cheri Beasley was a strong Democrat, I don't think that he had the controversy that Donald Trump has by any metric, which is why I think North Carolina, when faced up with the option of Joe Biden and Donald Trump again, there will be that 2-3% of voters that change their mind. What you see here is a 319 to 219 map, and what you know is not much has changed. The only flip here is the state of North Carolina, and it's not really that much of a shock. And the honest truth is, if there is a rematch, this will be a very boring election cycle on the side of election analysis. I'm sure it will be very interesting on every other front, but when it comes down to this election prediction, I honestly believe that Joe Biden would defeat President Donald Trump in a 2024 rematch, 319 to 219, as it stands today in March of 2023. So, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina go to President Biden. President Trump wins Texas, Ohio, Iowa, and Florida. Not necessarily enough to win, but still, Donald Trump isn't blown out in the expectation that maybe some people might think, because he also still provides a level of electability and a level of support that many other Republicans have been simply unable to match in states such as Iowa, Ohio, and Florida, which will be very interesting for future elections and future election cycles. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.